Welcome to Strength for Generations, the go-to podcast for Christian families who want to build strength, restore energy, and deepen connection with God at the center. I'm Christa Baker, Christian health coach, wife, mom, and co-founder of Baker Family Fitness. I'm here to help you honor God with your health and bring peace back to the process, to simplify what it means to build strength in your body, renew your mind, and care for your spirit, all without losing precious time with your family. So grab your coffee and your ribeye, and let's do this His way. Welcome back to the Strength for Generations podcast. Friends, I am joined by Dean Allison. He's the current member of parliament for the Niagara West. Dean was first elected in 2004 and was recently re-elected for his 8th term representing our region. Now, before entering politics, Dean had built a career as an entrepreneur and small business owner, and he has spent decades serving this community through both business and public service. Throughout his career, Dean has been passionate about advocating for families, small businesses, and giving people a voice on the issues that matter most. He is a founder of the Allison Inquiry, which was created to give Canadians an opportunity to share their concerns, experiences, and perspectives on important issues affecting our country. Today, we're going to talk about faith, leadership, public service, freedom, small business, the future of Canada, and what it means to live a lasting legacy. Dean, welcome to the Strength for Generations podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. We finally got connected.
Well, this is what you get because you see me at church too. So
yeah, that's true.
You're stuck with me, my friend.
Yeah, I can't get away. It's okay. That's good.
No.
I'm not trying to run. I'm here.
No. Okay. I ask this question at the beginning of every interview. So before we get into kind of all the nitty gritties of the things we're going to talk about today, if you could have a conversation with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Wow. Could I have a conversation with anybody, dead or alive? That is a great question. You know, I think that, you asked me that question. So it depends on the day, the week, the month, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm in my political hat now. There's certainly guys I'd want to speak to in the business side, right? There's the athletes I'd want to speak to, but because I'm kind of in the political space today, I've just got off another podcast talking about the Allison Inquiry, and maybe we'll touch on it briefly. I'm in the political space. So I think about a guy like William Wilberforce that fought the slave trade. And, this was not, an overnight success. This was something that took like decades to do, right? You think about the climate at the time and what he was trying to fight, and one person against all odds and that stuff. And so, I think talking to him and trying to get his perspective on how difficult it really was. We read history books, or even if we read the Bible, right? We read a chapter and a verse, and it's kind of like, okay, that sums up like a generation of people, like one verse. It's like there was more detail to it than that. And I feel that's the case with guys like William Wilberforce. I don't know a ton about him. I've seen the movies, I've read stuff on him and stuff, but what an overwhelming task it was to go against the slave trade, which was in vogue, right? It was the thing. You did that. So he was really going against the grain. I'd love to talk to a guy like that, and it could be any person like that in political circles that had to fight against something that, quite frankly, took years to do. I'd want to say, hey, were you discouraged? Was it as easy? I mean, books and movies romanticize, right? And make that stuff seem, oh, that's just not a big deal. But, what kind of sacrifices did you have to do? What did you have to deal with? And I would say the same thing with great Canadian prime ministers and great American presidents, right? All these people that have got a footnote in history. It's kind of like, what was it like in the trenches, right? Not what did the book tell us? What did the movie show us, right? But what was it? And we've seen movies on Lincoln, for example, right? But he was assassinated, full stop. And so it would be interesting just to hear what their thoughts were while they're going through it in the day, and actually hearing the truth, right? The God's honest truth, not the romanticized Hollywood version, which we've all become so accustomed to, right? Show me the story, give it to me in 2 hours, because I don't have the patience for anything more. It's even worse now if we decide to go to clips when it comes to TikTok or social media.
10-second clips.
I can't get in 15 seconds. I'm sorry. I don't even really understand what you're talking about, and I don't have the patience to stick with you. So let's go with him for today, just because my headspace is in political headspace right now.
Yeah, it's good. I love that. Just finishing up Second Kings, and I was like, "Oh, this battle has been going on for quite some time, so this isn't new."
So
You
true.
know? Okay, so before we talk about politics, I'd really like to learn a little bit about your faith journey. What role has your faith played in your life and the way that you lead? And then maybe give us a little insight as to what it's like to be a Christian in politics.
Sure. So, I find it interesting. I grew up in a Christian home. I always joke with people, tell them I'm a recovering Baptist. If you're a Baptist, you'll get that. If not, you may not. But I mean, I grew up in a pretty strict household. No hockey on Sundays, no school dances, no movies, no nothing. So it was strict. And my parents are awesome people. My dad coached my sports teams. They drove me to events. I did track and field basketball. I downhill skied. I did every sport. So I was not hard done by. But yet, a 10-year-old kid or a 12-year-old kid not being allowed to play hockey. I wasn't allowed to play competitive hockey one year because all the home games were on Sundays. And it wasn't even just during church. It was like, in the afternoon or the evening. But a young kid doesn't really understand that stuff. And so growing up, that was sort of, you know, Christianity and faith was about a bunch of rules in my mind. I went to a Christian school, was once again about a bunch of rules and about a bunch of all those kinds of things. And so I wasn't until later on in my life where I decided that I, was not doing a great job on my own. And so maybe I needed to sort of rededicate myself. I needed to, sort of seek God's will and trying to figure stuff out. And that was around university at one point when I'd been kicked out of university. I came back and finished my degree at Wilfrid Laurier. My marks, when your marks aren't great enough, so they ask you to take a year off to, think about things. So I did that. And of course I was trying to make my first million in university as well and losing money in the stock market. So I was at a point where I had no job and no money and no education. So I figured, hey, maybe I should talk to my pastor and find out what kind of job I should get. And he said, we're not worrying about the job right now. It's like, who's in charge of your life? So no, I don't want to talk about that stuff. I want to talk about my job. Like, what kind of job and career should I get? And he said, well, until we line up the first thing, the second thing really doesn't matter. So it was at that kind of time that I decided that, I wanted to trust God in a bigger way in my life. And he opened a lot of doors, answers to prayers happened. And, I found out myself working at Tim Hortons head office. And, from there, I was able to buy some Tim Hortons and some Wendy's restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. So that was sort of my thought process. And then over the last number of years, I've been in politics for 20 years, 22 years to be exact, this past June. How does it play out in your work and your faith? I mean, I always tried to be decent. I always tried to be kind. I always tried to treat my employees well. So I figured out that it just naturally was a result of the extension of me and trying to reaching out and helping my community. I was the president of the local hospital foundation. We finally just got it built, finally just opened in the last year or so after literally 20, 25, 30 years of the community coming to fight behind that. And so I look at my faith in politics, it's even a bit different again, right? In terms of what do you do? I mean, obviously, there are a lot of reasons why I'm in politics. I'm in politics because I want to help people. I'm in politics because I want to be the voice for the voiceless. I'm in politics because I want Canada to be a better country. I'm in politics because I really believe as a country we could do better than we've done before, and we should do better, right? But does that mean I'm a social justice warrior? No. I believe in personal freedom. I believe in also personal responsibility. And so you can have Christians in the church that are social justice warriors, where I call them bleeding heart liberals, really. I mean, it doesn't matter. What you see in the church is the same thing you see in society. I could show you almost any church, and if in my riding 50% of the people voted for me, which is what happened in the last election, and then 35% or 40% voted for the liberal, and then 10% voted for the green, I would see the same microcosm across the church, I find. I find it strange because, my view of the Bible and how I view things is totally different than what, say, another Christian. So, I find that my worldview is affected by my faith view, right? I do things and I believe in things, but that can differ from church to church and denomination to denomination, which is always hard for me to understand because I really believe in personal freedoms. I really believe in freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, right? Freedom of religion, all those kinds of things, and I'll defend that. But I also believe in personal accountability, right? So many people don't believe in personal accountability anymore. And so we have a society that doesn't blame anyone. There's no absolutes, and quite frankly, whatever goes happens, and it's not your fault. So personal responsibility plays a large a part of my faith journey, right? But also leads into how I think about things in politics as well.
I've had it told to me that faith should stay out of politics. And I was like, but it's a really big value system for some people,
Well, and think about it. You
you
think
know?
about faith or lack of faith. Say I'm an atheist. Does that stop atheists from getting involved in politics? Not absolutely not. Does
Mm,
that, social justice warriors, I call them, climate, radical climate ideologues, like all these people get involved in politics for different reasons, right?
mm,
I think that everyone that is elected to the House of Commons, the legislature of Ontario, run for your local town council. We have literally local elections all across the province of Ontario this fall. I believe every single person gets involved for the right reason,
mm,
but it's also based on where they come from. It's also based on what their ideology is. It's based on how they view their worldview. So I think, not enough Christians actually get involved in politics. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, at the end of the day, our Judeo Christian values is what formed the West, right?
mm.
People left Europe in after the Renaissance, they came over here on the Mayflower 200, 300 years ago because they wanted a better life. They wanted opportunity, but they also felt that religions of the day, denominations of the day, if you will, were very stifling and were not the kind of freedom they wanted. And so they came to this country for a variety of reasons. I mentioned economic, but I think one of the biggest reasons they came was that they could be able to, serve out their faith in the way they also felt that they should. And that's what happens, right? That's how you
Yeah.
get various denominations because people think, you know what? That's not the way I read the Bible. It's not the way I understand it. And so then people, change it ever. And I don't like to get caught up in denominations, right?
Mhm.
I think it gets crazy when we do that. I think, we look at people and you can tell whether people have a faith or not by how they respond to other people, what their actions are like and how they treat other people.
Yeah, like where their heart's position really
Right.
is. Oh,
Absolutely.
so you said something about being the voice for the voiceless. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think, a lot of people, and my job as a member of parliament is many things. It's to listen to people who come to my office with problems and concerns. I can't tell you how many people show up in my office that I have nothing to do with the issue they want. I'll use this example, two examples very quickly. I had a lady show up in my office, 15, 17 years ago, forever ago. They knew my name and they knew who I was because of my profile as a federal member of parliament. And what they said is that we got a child in our family that's deaf, and we need signs in our neighborhood for a deaf child, right? We see these signs from time to time. We don't know where to go to, but because we know your name and we know of you, we're coming to you. Well, what do you think I said? I'm happy to help. That's not my position. Like, I don't actually have, I don't actually, I'm not in charge of signs in local municipalities. But what I can do is I can point you in the right direction. And so it's always an honor to me when people show up and say, I don't know what the issue is. I don't even know if you're responsible for it, but I've heard your name. I know who you are. I know of you. And I want to start by coming to talk to you. And so I think that's an honor. I never turn people away. What I try and do is help them get the help they need. Second cute story that I have is that Roy Green, when he used to do his radio show in Hamilton, I think since it's been to Montreal and he may be even retired now. I hope he's not. He was a great champion, Roy Green. He called me up one day in Hamilton once again 10, 15 years ago and said, Dean, I got a lady on my show, and I think he did maybe a 2 or 3 hour show. He called me at the start of the show, said, this lady by Revenue Canada, CRA, Canadian Revenue Agency, CRA, thinks she's dead. And because they think she's dead, she can't access any programs, right? If you're dead, you can't access programs. Could be child tax benefit. It could be old age security, and any number of programs. I need some help. And she has been to CRA for over 2 years. And every time she goes to them, she gets bounced around. Well, guess what, Chris? Like, the CRA is in my purview, right? CRA, Canadian Revenue Agency, is something that federal member of parliaments are responsible for. And so I made a couple phone calls. I knew some people. And what had happened was, alongside her name, there was a box that said deceased or not deceased. The box had been ticked, and no one, as she
Like,
got
how does that
no
happen?
one in 2 years could, figure out or tick that box. And so I always joke and I said, I helped bring this woman back from the dead. So
Oh,
literally, the start of the radio show, she was deceased in the minds and the eyes of CRA, and by the end of the show, she was alive and very well. And all kidding aside, she'd been alive and very well for 2 years, but was receiving the runaround. And I could give you hundreds and thousands of stories of how we help people every day, and that's pretty meaningful when they have a hard time. Oh my goodness, how do you access this system? How do you do that? And so when I say I'm the voice for the voiceless, it's not only that, but it's
mm,
other people that come and say, I don't know who I should talk to, what I should do, who could I go to? Would you be my voice? And I look at that as a complete and total honor to be
mm.
able to do that, even if though the issue may not be specifically related to the federal government, which is where and what I represent.
Well, I can speak to that from personal experience. Do you remember our first encounter? I don't know if you
I
remember.
do.
Do you remember my phone call to you?
I do. You have to remind me because you and I have had hundreds of phone calls since then,
I
right?
know, but so it was during the pandemic, and I had a mask exemption because I had a respiratory issue, and my respiratory specialist was like, regardless of what you believe, like, you really shouldn't be wearing this. And it was triggering me. It was giving me like some trauma responses from some past issues that I was still working through. And every time I would go out in our town, I would get kicked out. I would get yelled at. I would get all of the things. And I'm like, listen, man, I'm not trying to change everybody else. You go and do your thing. And I understand it was a very sensitive subject for a lot of people. But when you're on the other side of it, it was also very sensitive too. So I believe we should have compassion on people regardless of the circumstance. And I think I emailed your secretary originally, or I called into your office because Sam Oosterhoff wouldn't respond. I had called a couple times and I had issues with that. And I was like, I'm calling Dean Allison then. I called your office and you sat with me and talked for like, I think it was like 30, 35 minutes. I remember sitting down here in my basement. I remember explaining to you, like, do you know what it feels like to be told that you're not essential? Do you know what it feels like to be told that the career that you chose, the career that helps people, is not good enough? It's not essential. You're not. And you and I had an amazing conversation. And then at the end, you were like, this is my cell phone number. If you need anything at all, you just use that phone number. Don't hesitate. That was our first encounter. And I remember talking to Mike after, and I was like, dude, we're voting for this guy like forever because he is amazing. And then you and I started really talking about health stuff. And I was like, we're not even talking about health. And then I came on your podcast. Remember we came and we shot it
Sure, I
over.
was doing a showdown at the news forum. Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then we had started talking about how can we get this country healthy, which I do want to talk about a little bit later. But just hearing you say the voice or the voiceless, I mean, from me personally, I remember talking to friends of mine. They're like, how did you get your MP to get on a call with you? We have been trying, and it was in all these other regions in Toronto and Scarborough and you name it. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe I just got the good one. So sorry, guys.
My job. It's my job. I'm paid to listen, right? That's what I'm my
But
what
it didn't feel like that though.
yeah.
Like,
No,
and
no.
that's the difference between you came from a different perspective. You came from a place of like it was genuine. And I have bullshit radar. I'm sorry, but I do. I know this is a Christian podcast, but I'm really good at reading BS. And so is my husband, obviously, doing what he does. Like, he can read people very well. And I was just like, we were so impressed. And then, by God's grace, he allowed us to build a nice friendship, which I'm super grateful for along the way. But yeah,
It's
so
your fault I'm going to the same church as you now too. So
I
I
know.
you and my friend Graham who kind of coaxed me, and I hadn't gone to church. You talk about a faith journey. I hadn't gone to church in what 17 years, right? Maybe more.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, I think it's probably time to get back into church. And you talking to you and talking to Graham, and ended up, hey, this is good. So it's funny when we talk about our faith.
Mm,
And it's so sometimes it's a tricky thing, right? I mean, we feel confident, we don't feel confident, we don't feel worthy, right?
mm,
How can I talk about my faith when I know I've failed as a human so many times? And I think that's, what you tell people? It's like, sometimes we don't go to church, or sometimes we don't do whatever, tick the box A, B, or C because we feel guilty, or we feel like we're not worthy, or we feel like we're not measuring up, or we're not hitting the standard. And that's the crazy thing about faith is that God doesn't really care if you're consistent or not. Yeah, of course, He'd like you to be consistent. right? But he just wants you to reach out and he wants you to, participate and he wants you to talk to him and all that stuff. And he doesn't keep score. Obviously, the more you talk to him, the more you become, like him
Hmm.
and all those other kinds of things. And you get teaching along the way and you're reading the word and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that a lot of times what keeps us from him is that our own self imposed standards, right? We feel like we don't meet the mark. We don't deserve it. We are tick the box. I don't deserve it because of A, B, or C, right?
Hmm.
Or you know what? I don't need him. I don't need him as much as my friend. Or we got 1,000 excuses, and that sometimes keeps us from actually sometimes living out our faith in a bigger way.
I'm just reminded right now because this is the same scripture that keeps coming to my mind lately. Is like, why are you worrying about the speck in your brother's eye when you got a plank in your own? And it's just been like really on my mind a lot lately. And so, we don't know where people are. And I think for you and I just almost, well, and this is why I really want to dive into this Allison inquiry is, I think during the pandemic, it also created a distrust, not just for like leadership, but leadership within those organizations as well. Cause that was a really challenging time for everyone. Right. And then that's why when I was like, Dean, trust me, there's so many people that are going to really, you're going to love them. Cause I'm like, if I could feel as joyful as I am there, yeah, it's good times. Okay. So let's go with for someone hearing about the Allison Inquiry for the first time right now. Can you
Sure.
explain what it is, why you started it, and what you hope comes from it?
So let's go back because you made reference to COVID, right? During COVID times, I can't tell you how many phone calls, Crystal. That was one of them. But I had literally hundreds of phone calls from a variety of people for a variety of different reasons. Like I was talking to restaurant owners that were saying, "Hey, I'm going to lose everything." I was talking to a third year nursing student who's saying, "Hey, if I don't get vaccinated, I'm not allowed to finish my program." I was talking to a 60-year-old truck driver that says, "I'm in a truck by myself, and if I don't get vaccinated, I am not going to be. I'm going to lose my job," and everything in between. So it was not even a question of like we could talk about lockdowns, we could talk about kids falling through the cracks of school. There was just so many issues that were happening, and I was like sort of ground zero, right? People were coming to me and saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm saying, "Well, I'm not the government. I didn't make decisions." But even it didn't matter. We developed this kind of like if the government doesn't tell us what to do, and if we don't listen to the government, that somehow we're less of a citizen, less of a person. We're a crackpot. We're A, B, or C. And so I very quickly learned from that the distrust in government institutions. You talked about that. This distrust in institutions, which is really what it is, whether it's government institutions or government itself, because of lies that have been told or what we've been led to believe that we knew that we wanted to have more conversations. So let's fast forward a bit the last couple of years. There was a number of people that came to me and said, "Hey, Dean," and I've heard from people from all over this country. I've heard from people from the West, East, North, South, and said, "Dean, like I feel like I've been injured." And I don't feel like anyone's listening. As a matter of fact, I can't even tell the stories. We know that during COVID it was highly divisive. You talked about it. Families were divided, churches were divided, communities were divided. Your friendship, neighbors, everyone was divided. It was crazy. So you always felt like you were on a bit of an island, right? Like, I mean, I'm by myself. Is anyone else feeling that way? And then I talked to Krista about something, and all of a sudden you realize, hey, you're not alone. I mean, I had these conversations with other people as well, but then you realize, hey, there's other people that are not alone. And so I think when a government wants to keep people divided, is they want to keep people separated. So COVID was really a good example of if I got to stay in my 500 square foot apartment and I can't take my kid as a single mother across the street to the park. Think about that. That's the most cocoa bananas thing I've ever heard in my life, that you can't actually go outside in the fresh air with lots of people. And they have all these stupid rules that I fought against. And I got, sort of ostracized a bit for that as well. Well, like I said, we fast forward to today, there's a number of people that have been injured. And a lot of people did what they believed they were supposed to do. Some did it willingly, and some did it with a gun to their head. As I said, I talked to you about a 55, 60-year-old truck driver that needed the job to survive and put food on his table. What is he or she going to do, right? The medical community was no better. If I wanted to work in a hospital, I had to do these things. And so it really put some tough choices on people. And so we fast forward to today, and there's a number of people that reached out to me and said, "Hey, Dean, like I've had issues, man. My health is a problem." And there's 100 different things, and maybe not 100, maybe there is 100. I don't have them all in front of me of, myocarditis, and there's issues with joint pain, and there's issues with Ball's palsy. And the list goes on of side effects from the vaccine. And people feel like they've been isolated. People feel like they haven't had a chance to tell their stories. And so for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been hearing these stories privately, but I've really wanted to talk about them publicly because feel that people need to know they're not alone. That's the most important thing people can know, is that they're not alone. And so I've been thinking about it, and the timing has not been right. Either coming into an election or out of an election, we're trying to do A, B, or C. And so I've been thinking about this stuff for, as I said, the last 2 or 3 years, talking to people about it. I've talked to a lot of people about it, but they just never felt right. The timing wasn't right. I didn't have the right partners, etc. And so really all the Allison Inquiry is to do two things, maybe three, but two for sure. And that's do the same things I do in my work every day, and every MP does in their office every day. One is to listen to people. That's what I do. Christa, that's what I do. I listen to people every day, just like you do when you're talking to people about their health concerns. And the second thing we're required to do, and what I do in my job, is help them access programs. Second thing you do is you help access people, give people programs, give people a plan. And so there's a number of things the federal government does. Taxes is one of these things. So we help people get their tax money back. OAS, Old Age Security, CPP, Canadian Pension Plan. These are all financial things. Well, we know for a fact that the government admits that people were injured from the vaccine. This is not Dean Allison talking to my constituent. This is the government saying they acknowledge that people were injured. Some stats that the government recognizes through public health, and I believe these stats are way low, but these are government acknowledged stats, is over 60,000 people were injured by the vaccine. 11,000 severely, and they started a vaccine injury support program. Well, 3,500 people applied to that program. Only 3,000 people were accepted. And out of 3,000 people, 252 people, 252. That is less than half of 1%. 0.42% of the 60,000 have actually received any kind of form of compensation. Global News, to their credit, did an awesome expose last year. They did a 4 or 5 month investigation and found the third party, Oxano, who are administering the program, had received over $55 million, and only $35 million not only, $35 million had gone to overhead. So think about that. In a program that only had $55 million given to it, over 2/3 of it went to administration. So if I could fast forward to the fact that A, we know people are injured because they tell me, they tell me that. B, we know there's a program available because the government admits that, so they know that people are injured. And then C, we look and we realize there's been 30 countries around the world that are doing various types of inquiries, either government, either committee work, or individuals. The U.S. has had the most robust one under Senator Ron Johnson. We've done nothing in Canada. Now, I would like to see a more fulsome inquiry into the effects of lockdowns and vaccines and manufacturers and all this kind of stuff, but that's not in my purview. And quite frankly, in my purview is listening and helping people get access to programs that they are entitled to as Canadian citizens. So as I was having these conversations, trying to narrow down what it would look like, this seemed to make the most sense to me. Listening to people in a public forum, and then try and help them get access to what they're entitled to, and realizing that the program has been broken. It's been brought back under Health Canada. They're talking about a new program. They're trying to figure it out. But I'm going to tell you, 55 million was something that they were looking at, and only a third of the dollars they'd spent had gone to 252 people. And we know there's thousands of people injured. Then you know what? People need to have a conversation, and people need to go to bat. So when I talk about voices that haven't been heard, this is not something people want to talk about. This has been poo-pooed. This has been, I can't believe you talk about this kind of stuff. I'm saying, hey, it's my job. Relax. My job is to listen to people and to make sure that their voices are being heard. I am to be the voice for the voiceless. That is what my job as a member of parliament. And so over the last couple months, I had a chance to meet Sean and Teresa Buckley. They came into town to talk about a private members bill around natural health products, something I'm sure that you are very supportive of as well, and something one of my colleagues, Lane Calkins, was looking at. They had gone coast to coast talking to people about natural health products. A friend of a friend, an acquaintance, had put the three of us in touch. And so last October, we sat down and had a conversation. And I said, "This is what I'm thinking. I know you've been involved doing inquiries before." He was involved with an inquiry called the NCI, the National Citizens Inquiry, and I had seen some of his stuff, although I wasn't completely familiar with all the things they'd done. And I knew that they had had some experience. And I thought, you know what? If I was interested in doing something, would you guys be interested in partnering with me? And so that's how the conversation started. And I wasn't even sure that last October if it was something I wanted to do. Like I didn't know how much heat I was going to take. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew in my heart of hearts, these people were crying. These people were looking. These people were asking for a voice. And I thought, if not me, who's going to do it? And so that was kind of where we came to some additional conversations into this year, and really didn't make a final decision to go until a couple months before our original press conference we had in June.
I know. I remember. I mean, thank you so much for, first of all, doing this work, because remember when you were going through your election and even just kind of leading up to it? I think we went to that prayer breakfast in Hamilton. Um, and I kept telling you, Dean, I'm praying for you to be bolder. That's what I feel like God is doing here, like, let's go, let's be bolder. And so behind the scenes, that was
Is this
happening.
bold enough for you?
But yes,
Okay.
absolutely. But I understand. I remember people looking at me like I was crazy because I would share with family members. I don't care like what your position is. To be honest with you, I don't. I care about you. I care about your wellness. I care about those things, but these are actually really things that are happening. I remember one woman had joined my program during the pandemic, and she had just finished having the first one, and like debilitating migraine. So we were already working together. I already knew where she was in her journey, in her health journey. She goes and gets this thing. And then for 3 weeks straight, she had to cancel doing the program because she's like, I can't even go from like laying down to standing up without my head debilitating migraines. And she's like, it's been like that for 3 weeks now. And all I wanted to do was go see my three-year-old granddaughter. And like, that's heartbreaking. And for somebody to say she's lying,
Right. That's
that's
that's infuriating.
it's
That
so
angers.
infuriating. And you're going to get tons of heat because this is a topic that we weren't allowed to talk about before. We actually would have, your social media, like even a podcast like this, even saying those words, they would bleep them out
Yeah.
because then those would start getting taken down and social media
I just
posts and stuff like that. I'm like, well, you know, everyone is entitled to their own thoughts and opinions, but these people deserve to have a voice. And so, like, praise God that you're doing this work. And honestly, I'm just going to keep praying that this thing goes the way that He wants it to, not what we want it to here on earth. Like it's it's all in His hands. And I'm really proud of you for doing that work. But that
you
actually brings me to thinking about censorship. So you've talked to me a little bit about censorship over time. Some people don't realize the impact that that actually has on their lives. We hear a lot of complacency, like here in Canada, like we're so free. Imagine living over in this other country. Sure, some other countries are really terrible and 100% censored. There's definitely areas that doesn't mean that we don't pay attention to it here in Canada, right? So can you talk to us a little bit about censorship and how
Sure.
that's impacting Canadians?
No, that's a great question, and I'm going to keep it high level. So I'm not going to talk. I'll mention like Bill C9, C11, C22, C34, C36, but I'm not going to get into the weeds on what those are. That would take another podcast another time. But you talked about the fact that when we going through COVID, how people were deplatformed for mentioning these words. I just got off a podcast that was they're a health company in Quebec, and they said when they started talking about these things, they were deplatformed on YouTube. So think about that. And a lot of people on social media, independents that make their living from social media, whether it's through YouTube or through Instagram or Facebook and all that stuff, we're not allowed to talk about these things. And so that's a form of censorship, right? We choose a topic, and there's many forms of censorship. And what's been happening in Canada once again is that that this government, ever since COVID too, surprise, surprise, right? But ever since COVID, the last 5 years, there's been dozens of pieces of legislation that have been introduced. Now, some were killed. When I mean killed, they died on the order paper because we had an election, right? So any legislation that gets added during a parliament, if you have an election, all that stuff gets wiped out and you start again. So we've had many iterations of some of the same things. And we had, C9 just recently was a bit of a conversation about criminalizing certain texts of the Bible or the Quran or whatever the case may be by repeating some of these texts in terms of hate speech. And I think your husband Mike would appreciate this, because of the line of work he does. I feel for our law enforcement that already has many of the tools. I'm not saying they have all the tools to deal with things like hate speech and other things, but we've got a judiciary and we got activist judges and we've got, what we have going on is that we end up taking people to court on a variety of things. I think of some of these Palestinian protests right now that are happening in the streets that quite frankly are completely unacceptable when they're saying like death to the Jewish people, death to Canadians, death to whoever. Like this is, categorically wrong and needs to be dealt with. And we have the legislation in place, but we just ignore it or we let people off the hook. I think of having conversations with your husband about how they work on certain cases and spend months and months trying to build a case. And the person would be arrested, the people would be arrested, and they could be out on bail literally before the paperwork was dry, the ink was dry. And I've got a number of friends in law enforcement, and you find, I stay right off that I'm unequivocally a huge supporter of our first responders, fire, police, ambulance. I'm unequivocally supportive, 100%. I love what they do, and I support them without any caveats. And I think to themselves, how do you deal with morale in our police force when you have people working around the clock to do the right thing? And then when they do the right thing, people are let off. So this permeates all the way and rumbles all the way through society. So when we go back to the censorship issue, there's a couple of things, right? Cancel culture is alive and well in Western democracies, right? And so if you talk to a individual that we think is unworthy, you can be canceled just for talking to that person. That person's already been canceled. So I'm not talking about you being canceled because of something you said. I'm talking about you being personally canceled because of somebody you've talked to or associated with. And the list goes on and on. I mentioned almost over a dozen pieces of legislation that have been added. And it's anywhere from the refusal of Google and the refusal of Facebook to share news pieces because they wouldn't pay as they were being extorted by the government. They wouldn't pay a price. And so now it starts to something as simple as Google. I can't share a news piece. So you think of our local independent. We have the Grimsby Lincoln News. We've got a couple local papers where, quite frankly, how do you think that individual would feel if we could share his or her piece article they wrote for the local paper? We could share that across the country. We can't do that. We can't do that on Facebook. We can do it on X, and X is great. But we've got a government that is threatening to get rid of X. And that's the not. And whether you are on X or not, this is not the debate because some people may say I don't. There's too much hate. There's that kind of stuff on there as well. But what happens if we can't actually find a place? And so then we have the government that had a piece of legislation that is able to manage logarithms when it comes to what gets seen on social media. So think about that for a second. You got a YouTube channel, you're monetized by how many people view your content, and now you got a government that can maybe mess with that. That's unacceptable. Latest piece of information, well, there's actually a couple pieces of information. One of them is what it was done with Meta. So we had Apple, Meta, which is Facebook, and we had Google all show up. Obviously, anyone that's got a smartphone, they have your information. They have all your information. You choose to use this, they have your information because it tracks you through various apps, et cetera, et cetera. And what they just passed recently was where they could leave, and I explain it in the simplest of forms. If Mike wants to get a search warrant, he's got to go and make the case before a judge before he can get it, or any one of the people on his team as they're looking into an investigation. That's essentially what happens right now when it comes to people getting our information online. And what's happened is that the legislation has changed. So basically, we're leaving that as an open search warrant, never required to be there, so that at any time in the future, we could get that information. And, I can say today, well, I don't have any problems with the current administration, the current government. But when you leave that open, it's always future governments I worry about, right? As far as where you're able to do that. And so that's one of the pieces of information that we have. And so we see a lot of bills coming forward where the first piece is a great initiative and the part two is about the censorship and control, right? We have bodies now, they're talking about setting up in bodies that are going to determine what's hate speech. We see in England right now, people are going to jail for nasty memes or for offensive memes or what the government determines as offensive memes. And that has gotten completely out of control. I tell the story about a teacher in Ireland that refused to use pronouns for his students and ended up spending 2 years in and out of jail. Now, he didn't spend the whole 2 years in jail because not using the pronouns. He was in jail because of contempt of court, right? It was contempt of court because he wouldn't follow through. And so we already see this happening in places like Western Europe where censorship and I can get into digital ID. I'm not going to get into all that stuff. I'm just talking about legislation that's becoming before our house today more and more, and we're continuing to tighten the noose around our necks in terms of what's going to be acceptable in the future in terms of hate, in terms of speech, and in terms of the platforms we're able to use them on.
Yeah, and we have to look in history books. We see how hard it is for, let's say, our own citizens here in Canada that have done very bad things to actually end up in jail and stay in jail. Yet we're gonna really go over and pick on this person for a meme. Like let's learn to prioritize our time a little bit better, and that makes the individuals that are going to have to do that job, not want to do that job. So then we start losing them too. And I keep hearing this ad. I think it's a Doug Ford ad, I think it's an Ontario ad, and it keeps talking about how it's got like a kid's voice in there and it's like, I need safer streets and we need to build jails and this and that. And I'm like, how about we start actually just putting some of these bad guys who have been arrested in jail, or if they're not from here, maybe we just stop letting them all in. Like, I'm not saying it's all, but there's a lot. Like, I know firsthand. So I'm not just pulling that
So
out of my own
this is lived
whatever.
experience from what you hear, right? You know, and
Exactly.
and I would also say around the censorship piece, don't take my word for it. If you talk to any and we've got any number of, recent immigrants to our country, we're all immigrants at one point in time, from Eastern Bloc countries, right? The Bulgarias of the world, Serbia, like any Eastern Bloc countries that have dealt with huge censorship, they're the ones that are got the greatest concern. They're saying,
Yeah.
"I've seen this movie. This is
Yes.
not my first rodeo. I've seen this before. I left that country to come to Canada because I wanted to be freer." And listen, I'm not a fan of the European Union at all. I'm a fan of Europeans. I
Right.
love European people. I've been over there because of a number of organizations I've sat on, and the European Union is a technocratic, bureaucratic nightmare where unelected officials set the rules and look at all these kinds of things. And, our current government's cozying up to who? China as a strategic partner, one of the worst in the world for human rights, censorship, the list goes on, as a strategic partner. Their second people that they're looking at trying to emulate and be more involved with are the European Union. So once again, European people good, European government bad. Like, I can't be clear with that. And when people talk about Europeans, they think we're talking about the people. The people are awesome. They're living under the same rules, constrictions, etc. The European Union is a disaster, and people are ignorant. They're stupid. They have no idea what's going on over there. And so we hear, oh, Europe, let's get closer. We already have a trade deal with Europe. We should continue to do that. What we should never do is trying to integrate and try to follow and try to get closer to a government that loves censorship, loves, digital IDs, and loves all these other kinds of stuff that they're already been implementing for years and years now.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. I think that's given us a little bit of insight as to that area and the cause for concern for it. And it's not just this isn't made up stuff, even though some people like to say that. I hear it often. I'm like, okay, It just depends where you're getting your information from and where you spend your time, right? Something I think about, you obviously know what I do. I like to help people get healthy. I'm extremely passionate about just people understanding health because I think the world complicates it. I obviously go to biblical health because that's what I do. It's how I've operated my business. It's like God gave us this stuff in the beginning of his creation, and we should probably just lean more into that. When we do that, we're going to feel better. And I think about our country, I think about our healthcare, obviously the economy, right? Productivity, the future of Canada. But I don't think a lot of the times people connect those things, right? Like when I think about our healthcare, and yes, I'm going to use air quotes because I think it's actually sick care,
Right.
because at no time does anyone really like feel healthy when they're there. Like we haven't even figured out how to feed our people when they're in the hospital. And I know this firsthand because my mom was just in the hospital for 57 days. She fell and broke her hip, and my dad brought her lunch and supper every day in a lunch can, brought it up to her, and because we're like, this food is not going to elicit
No, for sure.
healing at all. So why can't we figure that out? And it's not that people are surprised by this. So when you say things like, "Oh, my mom's in the hospital," we're like, "Oh, the food." Like, come on. I think we can do a little bit better. And I think I talked to you about this maybe when I ran into at church about Pierre Polivier's conversation on Joe Rogan's podcast. So one thing that stood out for me is they talked about health. Joe Rogan will talk about health. He has controversial people that come onto that podcast all the time and some thought processes. Sure, they connected through their martial arts conversation. I feel like they should have used that time a little bit more wisely personally because it was exciting to see somebody finally from the Conservative Party go and do something like that to have their voice heard. And so I'm praying that you have an opportunity to do something like that one day. But I was so surprised when Pierre was like, you know, how do we get our country to be healthier? They had talked a little bit about I think it was what China did. And we're like, well, we can't do that. Or Japan, I think it was Japan. And I was like, well, we try to separate these topics. We try to separate the mental health, the education that the kids get, because most people are like, I didn't know any of this. When I finally get them, I can just teach you that this is really how you're going to operate and live a healthier life. I'm like, well, I was never taught that in school. I was never taught that growing up. My parents didn't know these things. Like this has been happening for generations. And when I look at the state of our country, I also see 67% is either overweight or obese. Metabolic dysfunction is on a rise. We have kids that are 6 years old that have fatty liver. We're not doing well as a country. And so when I heard him say, well, what do we do? Well, I'm putting my hand up right now. What do? We collaborate with people that know how to help people get healthy. We provide that tool. So, when you're like, I help these people get these resources to learn whatever they need to learn, or there's all of this government funding that's going to all these places. But why don't benefit companies like we have awesome benefits, but nothing would go towards getting coached well? I can get a registered dietitian, but they follow Canadian Food Guide and Canada's not doing too good. So I don't want their advice, And so as your perspective as a member of parliament, how do we start shifting that conversation so we can finally help Canadians get healthier? Because I am on board to be part of that conversation if you need any help.
Yeah, I know. So I think it starts at all levels, right? We took physical education out of the schools, right? I remember going to gym class and having to run around the track. I Is that still happen? It stops at a certain age. I don't know where it
No,
is.
I think they still, I mean,
Grade
I
9, grade 10,
well,
like,
I've been homeschooling for so long, but then also like with the kids' high school, like Casey, like grade 9, they got to do all different sports. So the gym program was pretty good. And they have a nutrition course there too, which was very basic. And to be honest with you, Casey was like, I'm just answering just to get the right answer, but I don't think that's the right answer
right. So I
because of
mean,
what I've taught her.
yeah, and I think it's all levels, right? At the end of the day, we've got to address it everywhere. I think the other thing is that we've got to, one size doesn't fit all. I mean, God bless our doctors. I love my doctor. He's a great guy. But most doctors get zero training when it comes to nutrition, right? So everything's solved with the pill, not alternative methods, not, natural health. not, exercise. I mean, my doctor tells me to exercise all the time. But he does 100% every time I see him. He says, you need to do A, B, or C. So I think any way we could do that. You raise a great point when it comes to what's available in our plans, right? What's available for healthcare? What's available for, is there anything available for mental health but not physical health? Is there anything available for gym membership, but maybe not that, but maybe we have 500 available for massage. Like I think it's got to be attacked at every level. I think that's the key. I think that's the key. And then I think we probably need to also look at our big processors. Like we're there's a lot of crap on the shelf, and I know because my wife reads the labels. I don't, and I'm an idiot, right? But I know that I'm starting to read the labels more now, and we got to get away from processed food. And I think that's a challenge for a large. So if I just stay away from processed foods but I don't exercise, I guess that's a good start. But that's not gonna sort of square the circle, right? So I think that you've got a great point. I think we should be talking about every level of education, quite frankly. But I think we also need to do a better job. And over time we've looked at labeling, we've looked at those are all like chipping away, but they're very superficial things. I think it's probably helpful that you could have a calorie count at any restaurant that you go into, but versus not. You go to the States, that's not really a thing. Like, you come to Canada and you got it at fast food
There's a
restaurants.
little bit where you're like, oh, that's a really big number. I don't even understand these numbers, but
It's
that
like,
just looks really big. So
that's
maybe I won't have it.
3,000 calories for that
Yeah, but
burger?
we're only covering calories. There's no education
Right,
on like
correct.
what these things are actually doing to our body.
Right.
And I think a lot of people try to um there's a lot of information out there. I know when people come to me, they're like, I'm so confused. I'm in the industry and I'm so confused. And I know, and I've studied this stuff for my entire life. I walk people through this process quite often. And I think people don't understand how simple it actually really is. And sure, we allow these things to come into our country that most countries don't even have. These ingredients are not even allowed. And I know you even brought up earlier, um, is part of your inquiry going to be about the natural health? There's something going on within the party right now when it comes to the natural health. Is there going to be a change? Is that's what people are
Well,
trying
no, I
for?
mean, I've gotta really keep it narrow focus. I mean,
Right,
as it is, like, like I said, we could have a very serious inquiry about a lot of things, right?
right.
But we just kept it narrow focus. I know what I mentioned was I met Sean Buckley, who has got a natural health feud, organization and is a big supporter of natural health products, and so I met him around a private members bill one of my colleagues had put forward. And so we were talking about natural health products, their ability to exist on the shelves, and that, they weren't going to be overregulated by Health Canada. There's a lot of great products that never make it to the shelves because of the restrictions and how onerous they are. And, Big Pharma owns, well, I would say Big Pharma probably owns Health Canada like they own a lot of politicians in the US as well. They
Mm.
spend a lot of money in media as well. So the list goes on and on. And that's just one aspect. We're not even talking about all the food that's highly processed versus natural food and fruits and vegetables and regular protein. You're hit the nail on the head. Like, I mean, it's pretty simple, right, in terms of what you need to do, but we get bombarded with so much information, and we show up on the shelves in the grocery store, and for natural occurring like meat and veg, it's a much smaller section than where all the processed food is on the shelf, right?
I teach my people like shop the perimeter of the store, right?
Yes,
We get
yes,
we get but at the same time, it's we've allowed it. It's we've allowed criminals to just get away with the crime. We've allowed people to abuse the system. We've allowed people to just allow this stuff because of what? Because we care about them? Do we?
profits, profits.
And I'll be honest with you, like I love the medical system. I do love like what we did. When my mom fell, she broke her hip. She had firefighters go into her bedroom. They carried her down the stairs safely. They got her into uh the ambulance. Then from there, within 25 hours, my mom was having surgery and got a new hip. Our country is good at that. I have a
That's
tear in my hip. I'm on month 25. I'm still waiting for surgery. I'm
great.
not a high priority. I'm glad my mom got what she got. But the recovery, the way that these nurses are just overworked and the way their shift is, it's so unhealthy. This is not healthy. So I'm praying for these poor women who are caring for my mom. How does your health feel? Right. And so if we could, my dream, my vision for Canada would be that we do bring the leaders together, the healthcare professionals that are trustworthy, that aren't paid and bought for, right? They're not just getting these bonuses because some company came and said, hey, I'm going to give you a bonus if you do and say this thing.
Right,
You're seeing it with politicians. And then we get coaches who understand how to compassionately help guide people towards wellness that aren't going to let you slide. And then we get good educators and we bring it into the schools. And then we have community members that can actually understand how to help people make these changes. That's the Canada that I dream about. And I
well,
would,
you think what it would do for our healthcare system and cost
oh
if
my gosh.
people were so we're very good, like I said, if I fall and break a hip or I have heart issues or cancer,
Mhm.
all these things are dealt with quickly
Uh-huh.
and professionally, and I can't say when I talk about first responders, I can't say enough positive about them. They were on the front lines during COVID, nurses, ambulance, fire, police, but, if we change the lens of what we look at and looked at going from prevention to just sort of like
Mm,
reactionary, if we break an arm, I want to go to the hospital because they're going to reset it and they're
yeah.
going to fix me. But, when it comes to preventive, we'd much rather pay thousands of dollars for pills and medicine versus paying for things ahead of time to help people avoid ending up in the hospital. Right. So it's the mentality. We've got to shift our focus, and as
Yeah.
you've said, and as I've said, we got to look at it at every level. This is not you just do it when you're an adult. You look at it when you're a kid, you look at it when you're in high school. It's got to be every level. The lens has got to be there for every level and for everything we do.
Yeah, 100%. I'm on board 100% if you ever need any help with this. I'm so passionate about it. But okay, I got one last question for you before we jump off, okay? So, eventually one day we're going to get to meet our savior. But when we get there, like, when you think about your time of serving others and it's complete, what do you hope people say about the life that you lived or the people that you help or the legacy that you left behind? Like, what do you really hope to hear about your life?
I hope people, I always joke, I've had the privilege to be an MP for the last 22 years. And, if you come from any other country in the world, they go, an MP, oh my goodness. Like, when I had my restaurants, we had a number of individuals from India. You would never even get within 100 miles of most members of parliament in India. I mean, let's remember they got 1.5 billion people, right? So so the perception of an elected official is different everywhere. I would hope that people would always say, "You know what? Dean was approachable. Dean was kind. He was friendly. He cared about what I had to do, and he tried to help me." Right. At the end of the day, it is a privilege and an honor to serve in my role as a member of parliament. Right. Very few get elected. Very few stay elected as long as I've been elected. I've been, eight times I've been elected or reelected, and that's a privilege. That's not just kind of like yeah, no big deal. And look,
Mm,
I, and me, Krista, and I think I'm just a regular dude. I'm a
mm,
regular guy. I treat everybody the same. I don't care if you're sweeping the floors. I don't care if you're a CEO. I don't care if you're a PhD. I just don't care. I treat everyone the same, and I want that to be the case. And I just hope that people would say, "Listen, he listened to our concerns. He tried to be helpful when he could." And I've always wanted to be that voice for the voiceless. I mean, that's essentially what I got involved in politics for, was to be able to represent people that sometimes having a hard time representing themselves. So
mm.
that would be my thought, and people say, "You know what? He was approachable regardless of what his title was. That didn't matter to him." And I meet people the first time, "Mr. Allison." It's okay. Let's stop that right away.
Yeah. So
So,
you're like, who's that?
we gotta go to Dean. Now, my friends in high school call me Dino. We're probably not there yet, but we could definitely settle on Dean.
Are we there yet?
Not
You're like,
not
no,
online, but
Krista's
private,
job.
yes. So, no, but you know what I'm saying? So, I would hope that that would be the case, that people said, "You know what? He was a voice for the voiceless." I would hope that was the case, and he was always approachable. and we could always talk to him, and he always listened, and he respected the conversation, and he took us seriously, and always respected what we had to say.
Mm, amen to that. That's so good. Okay, before I actually close us, I have a sidebar question. What's like the longest? Do you know who's been elected the most? Is
It's
there?
funny, I actually sent a question to the Library of Parliament. Someone else had been asking me this question, a friend, and so I just sent this to the Library of Parliament that did the research. And, there's been a lot of people that have been elected for many years. I mean, not a lot. There's been a few, but I think in terms of conservatives, there hasn't been that many that have been elected 8 times in a row. Like it's a very, very, very small number. But
Are
I
we
think
going like Guinness Book of World Records or something
no,
over
no,
here?
we're definitely not even close to that. But I'm just saying it's definitely I think the average time for most MPs is 4 or 5 years, maybe one term, right? We had a lot of people that showed up when we won a majority government in 2011 that were out of government when we lost in 2015. 4
Mhm.
years. That's
Yeah,
it.
either that or they just walk across the platform and go
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Some of
Sorry,
those
I
people
had to.
some of those people got reelected in 21. But it's just not something that happens
Mm,
on, and I don't have the numbers in front of me because I looked at them once. I thought they were interesting, and I passed them along to my friend, the guy
yeah.
that actually asked the question.
Okay.
But yeah, no, like I said, I think it's an honor to serve, and certainly people that get to serve over a couple decades is the exception, not the rule, for sure.
So good. Dean, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm
Well,
so
thank you.
grateful all the time whenever we get to sit in church together, even though I make you come to the front row. And you're
I
like,
show
why
up
do we
early
have to sit up here, Krista?
I show up early so I get the good seats in the back. You know what I'm saying? So.
I'm like, let's go, get up there.
Every
Um,
time you make me come to the front, I'm going, I can't show up too early. She's going to get me in the front again. So there you
yeah,
go.
every time, I've never fails. But even just being able to have conversations with you about all these things has been a blessing in my life. I'm just extremely grateful to have you in my life. The way that you and Mike have developed a relationship too, I really respect that. So, yeah, I appreciate your willingness to talk about the faith and leadership and the service and really the future of our country. So thanks for caring as much as you do.
Well, thank you. And thanks for what you do as well, trying to keep people and try to get people healthy. So
Amen. Thanks for tuning in to Strength for Generations. If this podcast encouraged you, it would be a blessing if you took a quick minute to leave a 5-star review. It helps more families hear this message and find hope for their health and faith journey. It lights me up to know this podcast is helping you. And if you feel led to share this episode, text it to a friend, post it to your stories, or send it to someone on your heart. God might use it to encourage someone who really needs it today. And don't forget to eat steaks, lift weights, love Jesus, and keep doing it His way.